That van out there.
Van.
Yeah.
Well, it sits a lot, so that may be an issue with it.
All right.
I started at least 4 times a week.
I should be. There we go.
Twice.
All right.
Did you get a chance to look at the thing I asked you about? You said you probably got something on my computer.
Yeah, I've got I'll show you tonight what I have. You can get it for cheap, and it's as good as anything. It's a whole commentary on the Bible. It's pretty good. It's called, I'll tell you right now what it is, I think. I can tell you.
Because Andy's got a New King James. It's got like a word for word or verse for verse breakdown.
Yeah.
Just wanted to do something a little more.
The Bible Knowledge Commentary, Dallas Theological Seminary produces it. It's pretty good.
And what's it called?
Bible Knowledge Commentary. And then the other one that gives a more general overview is the Eerdman, Eerdmans, Companion to the Bible. It's a lot more general, but it hits the high points.
Eerdman?
Yep, Eerdmans,
E-E-R-D.
Companion to the Bible. And then, man, you can go to the Blue Letter Bible, Bible Gateway. What's another one that I use that really is good? I'm in the wrong. Anyway, those are two good ones. All right. So we have been going through 2 Kings now and 1 Chronicles because they parallel each other. And tonight we're looking at chapter 5 in 2 Samuel. No, I'm sorry. Chapter 6 of 2 Samuel, which corresponds with chapter 13, 15, and 16 of 1 Chronicles. So as I've mentioned in the past, in the last couple of weeks, the reason why we have, it's not unlike the reason why the Gospels are different. If you read the Gospels carefully, you'll begin to discover that Matthew is written in a certain outline that follows Moses and the law and how he rescues the people of Egypt. So the people of Israel from Egypt. And so it's written for a Jewish audience. Luke is written for a more Gentile audience. You can see early on in Luke's gospel how, in fact, in Luke chapter 4, you can see kind of the whole flow of Luke's writings, how Jesus comes. He comes to the Jewish people, they reject him, and so he goes to the Gentile people. And so naturally the Gentiles are going to read Luke with a favorability that they may not read Matthew. John's gospel follows the festival season that goes throughout the year on the Jewish calendar. So he arranges his presentation of Jesus around the festivals. And then Mark is a more general outline written not for one particular audience or the other, although there's some argument about that. But he's more action oriented. A lot of his language is in first person. So he kind of brings you into the story and very quickly moves you from Jesus' ministry to the resurrection. So the 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles all function in that same way. They have different audiences, different emphasis that they are trying to get the people to remember, to follow, to understand. 1st and 2nd Samuel probably were written before or during the exile. 1st and 2nd Chronicle written after the people had returned from exile back to their homeland. So the audience is different, and so the writing's going to be different.
That's a stupid question.
What?
Is this the Israelites exile? No, that's wrong.
Yes.
Is it?
The Israelites went into exile in Babylon and Persia. And then Cyrus, who was a Persian king, who had conquered Babylon, let the people go back. The previous way of dealing with a conquered people was to move them around. You move one population to another country, that population to their country, switch them all around, so that there was that was the ultimate of defeat, was to be removed from your homeland. And so there was a defeatist thing, but it also was to develop a knowledge of the lay of the land and all those kind of things, so that you could mount a rebellion. Took a much longer time if you were in some country you'd never been in before. So it had a military value too. And so that's what happened. When they came back, the writers of the Chronicles are intent on people returning to the previous traditions of the temple, of the law, and all those various things. So we'll see the difference when we look at 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles. We'll look and see, man, one of these guys doesn't even talk about what the priests are to do, and the other one has a long explanation. Well, there's a reason why. The priestly roles were not as distant from the source of that when the law was written. It's not as distant in 2 Samuel as it is in 1 Chronicle. There's no need to remind, but it also just wasn't as important, because in 1 and 2 Samuel we see that the most important character other than God in those stories is David. And so the focus is overwhelmingly on David. Which, now we're at the place where David is moving the ark to Jerusalem. So I'll begin reading. 6 verse 1 says, David again assembled all the fit young men in Israel, 30,000. That number is kicked around, and people say, well, probably not 30,000. That's a lot. That's a lot. Maybe 30 units of soldiers, not knowing how many might be in a unit. 12 to 50 would have been a good number. So it might have been half that many, maybe, but it may have been the right number. He and all his troops set out to bring the ark of God from Baal Judah, which is these places have different. Every time they're wrote about, it seemed like they have a different name. This name lines up with what you find in 2 Chronicles. Back in 1 Samuel, it was called Kiriath Jearim. So the names have different meanings. They're identified at different times under different names. So it's like Cape Kennedy was Cape Kennedy up until it was Cape Canaveral. And so somebody decided to change the name, but it's the same place. The ark bears the name of the Lord of armies, who is enthroned between the cherubim. So they go knowing that what they are going to is the very presence of God, that the name was as important as God himself. They wouldn't even say his name for fear of saying it wrong, because even saying God's name was as important as addressing God in person. So for something to carry the name of God made it extremely reverential. You wanted to treat it with extreme reverence. We find later when Solomon builds the temple and he dedicates the temple to God, God says to him that my name will reside there. Okay, that this temple's not big enough to hold me.
Well,
Don't ever get the idea that it's big enough to hold me.
how far are they removed from the Ten Commandments?
A while. 1,000 years probably.
1,000?
Maybe more.
So it's still close enough that when God put on there, "Don't use my name in vain," they probably still took it fairly serious.
Well, when you look at the history, you get through Joshua, the book of Joshua, even by the end of the book of Joshua, it's kind of clear at the end that the people are drifting away from God. Well, by the time we turn the page to Judges, which is only, there's not even 100 years separating the two, you find that the people are they've slid way down the mountain, you know, and they go bad, and things get bad, and they're conquered, and they cry out to God, "Oh, help us," and he'd send somebody to help them, and he would help them. I mean, he would establish again the people, and then it would happen again. This happened 7 times in the book of Judges. And then Samuel, we read about Samuel and Saul. Samuel was God's holy man, but Saul really did not give God the respect that he deserved. And when the king doesn't, it's very difficult for the people to. In fact, at the end of the day, the people understand that it's their fault that they asked for a king, and it was the wrong thing to ask for. So David, although he is anointed by God and he is attuned to God, he really doesn't make a move to put God in this reverential place before the people until now. Because it's taken David a long time to establish himself as king. So there's a lot of reasons why he may be doing this. He may have decided, well, politically this is a good thing to do. I can unite the people around the ark. And that may have been part of his thinking, we don't know. But one thing that it does do is that it reaffirms for us, who is reading this, that David is true to God fully, not just when he needs God. It's time now to put God in his proper place in front of the people. And the ark was the full representation of God on earth. It was the place where, as this passage says, the Lord of the armies is enthroned between the cherubim. So there were 2 cherubim on the lid of the Ark of the Covenant, and it was believed by them that that's where God sat. Okay? They set the Ark of God on a new cart and transported it from Abinadab's house, which was on a hill. Now this is important too. When they laid down, when God gave them the rules about dealing with the ark, he told that there were going to be ark bearers, and they would carry the ark on their shoulders. Okay? And these 2 poles went through. 2 of them would carry the ark. All right? So when the Philistines, way back in 1 Samuel, when the Philistines stole the ark, they put it on a cart and they carried it off. Well, if you remember that part of the story, everywhere they go, people died and got sick until finally they said, "Y'all come get this thing. We're tired of having it in our country." And then round up at Abinadab's house. Okay. Well, it'll say for 20 years it was there. But the math don't add up, because Saul's reign was for nearly 40 years. And Saul's the one that let it slip away. And it wasn't that late in his kingship that happened. It was very early. So most Bible scholars and archaeologists put the time at more like 50 or 60 years. They're looking at the 20 years as being a time, another time bracket that has to do from the time that it was taken till Samuel died or something like that. All right. But the timeline doesn't really matter as far as how long it's been where it is. What really matters is it's been forgotten for so long. I mean, no one's given it any attention at all. They've just been happy to let it stay there at Abinadab's house, because nobody's dying if it stays at his house. So it was just kind of forgotten and left alone. So they set the Ark of God on a new cart and transported it from Abinadab's house, which was on a hill. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the cart. Now these guys, if if the ark's been there for 50 years, these are some old dudes. They're not just young men, okay? They were guiding the cart, and brought it with the ark of God from Abinadab's house on the hill. Ahio walked in front of the ark. David and the whole house of Israel were dancing before the Lord with all kinds of fir wood instruments, lyres, harps, tambourines, sistrums, and cymbals. So David it said that he went with 30,000 people, a vast representation, or 30,000 soldiers, which would have been a huge representation of the people. And they're all out in front of the ark, making this big old dance, and kind of like a party, a festive parade. You could almost compare it to Mardi Gras. The people in Canaan, the native people in Canaan, the pagan people, they would have these really raunchy parades for their god. They would have them sometime, at least once a year, sometimes more. But they would just turn into these big sexual orgies as they went along the road. And so some people have tried to compare this with that, but that's not what this is. This is more like people just being happy that finally God's going to be in his proper place before his people. That's what this is about. When they came to Nachon's threshing floor, and threshing floors were very often considered sacred places. It was a place where the harvest was brought, which was a gift of God. It was a place where it was threshed out so that you could have the grain, which was the fruit of God. It was the place where often some of it, not all of it, was milled at that place. So it was the sustenance provided by God. So the threshing floor was a very important part of the community, and a recognition of just how involved God was in the lives of his people. So they came to this threshing floor, and Uzzah reached out to the ark of God and took hold of it because the oxen had stumbled. Then the Lord's anger burned against Uzzah, and God struck him dead on the spot for his irreverence, and he died there next to the ark of God.
How different would that have been if he let it fall or something?
Well, I don't know. God had certain ways of doing things. And
then if it falls, do you pick it back up?
well, we could kind of take a sidebar here. God's made clear how he wants to be approached. There's a holiness of God that we often don't recognize or understand. So here's Uzzah. He thinks he's doing the right thing, but he's not. He's doing a very irreverent thing, an unholy thing. And God doesn't deal in unholiness. He strikes him dead for it. As innocent as it seems.
Or can you pull out that maybe Uzzah did it with some kind of
No,
anger?
you can only read what it is. I mean, he says, then the Lord Uzzah reached out to the ark of God and took hold of it because the oxen had stumbled. His whole intention was to keep the ark from falling off the cart, and he gets struck dead for it. And so we read that sometimes and we think, man, that's pretty harsh. We're in 2 Samuel 6.
Is it Samuel?
Yeah.
I said Chronicles over in Kings or something.
Yeah, I love.
He said
We'll be in
all
Chronicles in a minute.
He said,
Yeah, we'll look at Chronicles after we finish this little
I've really been
section.
here a long time.
But the lesson for us, Uzzah's lesson for us is, we need to know what we're doing when we begin to approach God in anything that we're doing. If we're serving him, if it's whatever it is, if we're giving our life to him, if we're speaking on his behalf, whatever we are doing, we need to make sure that we understand how we approach God in a way that He demands, that He is honoring. Because this isn't the first time that this has happened. This is the third time that this has happened, where a person's actions, they took it upon themselves to do a thing a certain way with Him, and it's not what He wanted. It's not the way that He had told them. Okay, so you might say, well, maybe they didn't know the law. Well, they should have known the law. Okay?
It just seems odd in this case when he was trying to do a good thing and
Yeah, well, being good, doing good,
well, I understand that.
you know, in what God's looking for.
So is there something wrong with Uzzah's spirit then?
No. What's wrong is we're not paying attention to who He is. We're not paying attention to the detail that He demands. And so what happens is our lives go haywire when we do that. I mean, there's just no other way to look at it. When we say that we are a servant of God and then we choose to serve Him on our terms, life is never going to work out. It's always going to be a mess. Now, it would, in fact, in that place, it would be better to say, I've got nothing to do with God. And God says, well, you're going to treat me however you decide to treat me. It's still isn't going to get you anywhere in the end. See? It always works out the same because God's made it clear for us how He wants us to interact with Him and how He wants to hold us. See? It's not just a one-way street with God. There is, and the word blessing so thrown around so poorly today, it's not even good. I don't like using the word. But what it is we begin to understand that this, the way that God wants us to approach Him is not because we have to do anything for Him or because we want something from Him. The way God is after our lives is that we just appreciate Him for who He is. We love Him for who He is. So we're not constantly trying to please Him as though He's some kind of demagogue that has to always feel good about himself and He gets that from us. We don't have to please Him, and we shouldn't always look to God wanting Him to just please us all the time.
That's right.
And in the worst of times, we should just go to God and say, you know what, I'm here because I love You.
Yep.
And that's not easy. I don't know how often we honestly do that with the people here on earth we love, you know. We're hoping they love us back, you know, but so that's something that we take from this because it is such a hard, it seems to be just a hard reality that God places before us. So he burned against Uzzah and God struck him dead out of his irreverence and he died there next to the ark. David was angry. So God was angry and then David got angry. David was angry because of the Lord's outburst against Uzzah. So they named that place Outburst against Uzzah. They renamed the place. The word would be Perez Uzzah. And God struck, David was angry, and that's what it is today. Verse 9, and then it says David feared the Lord that day. So he's angry, and then he comes to his senses and thinks, I've never been in this place with God before. Now this is something, this is a turning point for David. Up until this point, what's happened in David's life? Everything's gone right for David. He's the golden child. And nothing goes wrong. And when David interacts with God, he's saying, Lord, what do you want me to do? Should I do this or should I do that? God says, well, I want you to do this. And so David does it. Everything works out good. This is how things are going along with David. And now David gets this idea, you know what? I'm going to bring the ark to Jerusalem. I'm going to make my city, Jerusalem, God's city. And this can't be anything but good. And then all of a sudden this happens. And David, for the first time, feels this anger toward God for what he does, but also kind of sort of for who he is. And then he begins to get fearful. So he goes from this place of just total defense against God. He's angry, almost offense, really. He's angry, and just as God burst out against Uzzah, it's like David wants to burst out against God about this. But then in that almost that same instance, we read that he feared. And so when we hear that word that he feared God, was that the response that God was looking for?
Maybe.
Sometimes we have to fear.
I mean, reverential.
Yeah. When we find ourselves, we understand now that that God's presence is a holy presence. And I'm just kind of behaving the way I want to behave. I'm doing what I want to do. I get angry like I would get angry with anyone else. And this is a holy God. And at once he begins to fear just where he is. This is the awesome power of God. Okay? Now modern readers look at this and say, well, I don't want to serve a God that I got to fear. Well, if you're going to serve God, there's going to be a point at which you're fearful. Let's just decide that you're going to worship a bear. Okay? Let's say today I've decided that a bear is a good God to worship. I'm going to go worship a bear. We'll go cozy up to that bear and see how long you last.
That's right.
You won't do it. You'll be fearful of that bear. Because that bear has a power over you that with one swipe of his hand, take your head off. So are you going to approach that bear because now he's your God, that you're going to say, well, this is all rainbow and lollipops. I really need a kind bear, so I think I'll just believe in my heart that bear is just going to be overwhelmingly kind and I can treat it however I want to treat it. Because that's my bear. That's my God bear. Well, you go over there and you poke the bear. Maybe you just want to tickle the bear. You just want to say to the bear, oh, I love you. But the bear don't like to be tickled and the bear don't like to be poked. And there's a reason why that is. You take your head off. Okay, well that's a very simpleton way of looking at God. But it is, from our vantage point, the same thing. God is God, and we don't decide how we're going to approach him. Because how could we know how to approach him? How could you know? Especially before Jesus, how would you know? You wouldn't know. You would only know what you see in the lightning, see in the thunder, the great signs and miracles that he would work, the words that he would speak through prophets that were often ignored. How else would you know? We're so limited in our way of knowing anything.
Before Jesus, I think there was probably a lot more direct communication than...
Yeah, but with who? Not many, just the prophets. And they were killing them left and right because they weren't saying what the kings wanted to hear.
Right.
Yeah.
But as time went on, you lost some of those people just from being people. So God had to...
You really think there's more direct communication in the Old Testament than with the Spirit in the New Testament?
It seems like it. I mean, they just don't write about it.
No, I mean, I'm thinking about how God speaks to you. He will speak to you directly.
Probably.
Probably. If you were listening. You're making my point for me. Okay? So Jesus makes it pretty clear.
It's just an idea.
How we pray. He makes it pretty clear the life that we're after. He says, I don't do anything unless I see my Father do it. I don't say anything unless I hear my Father say it. So we begin to get a pattern of life here that worked pretty well for Jesus. It led him right to the place of his perfection, and in doing so offered us salvation. So we have that same privilege. And but if we abuse it like Uzzah, we just kind of treat God however we want. and say, well, he'll understand because he's God, it leaves us kind of empty in our relationship to him. All right, enough of that. So when we look over in now First Chronicles in chapter 13, we see the same story in chapter 13. Almost, some of it's verbatim. And when we get to verse 12 in First Chronicles, it says, David feared God that day and said, how can I ever bring the ark of God with me? Now, why would David ask that question?
Because he didn't want to do it wrong.
He didn't want to do it wrong. David was in the dark as to what to do. How will I ever overcome this problem?
And what do you mean?
First Chronicles chapter 13, verse 12.
13, okay.
So it says, David feared God that day and said, how can I ever bring the ark of God to me? So, David did not bring the ark of God home to the city of David. Instead, he diverted it to the house of Obed-Edom of Gath. Okay, so it's still on this cart. Not supposed to be on the cart, but that's the best they got. And they take it to this guy's house. The ark of God remained there and with his family and his house for 3 months. And the Lord blessed his family and all that he had. So two things are going on here. One is, David's got to find out, what am I doing? You know, very, very brashly, when David would go into battle, he would go to God and do what? Hey, am I supposed to attack these people or not? Yes, attack them. Well, should I go face them head first or should I just go around the back? What do you want me to do? Well, you sneak around the back and I'm going to be up above, and when you start hearing footsteps in the clouds, you'll know to go because I'm already on the move and we'll defeat them. I mean, it's just real simple. And so David would do exactly what God would say. Okay, now contrast that, if you remember, with Saul. Saul would just decide, oh, the Philistines are mounting an army against us, we better go out there and fight them. And sometimes he'd call on God. First time he did. Second time he called on God, and he didn't wait long enough. He was told to wait, but he didn't wait, and he was defeated. And then the third time he just went off and did whatever he wanted to. In fact, he had tried to consult God himself, put on the priest's robe and blah blah blah, you know, all that business. Well, David was the contrast of that until this. David, in the most important action he's taken up to being king now, is securing the ark in the place in Jerusalem, which comes to be known as the city of Zion, or the city of God. He doesn't consult God once. So we have to look and think, why is he doing this? Maybe it is for selfish reasons. Maybe David doesn't want to enamor himself to the people by bringing the ark to Jerusalem. Maybe this is just a political ploy that David's about, because he doesn't really ask God about it at all. Okay? So we've got to kind of step into this from where David's been and where he is now, and begin to make some sense as to why. And so after Uzzah died, David takes 3 months to consider what he has to do next. In the meantime, this family, Obed-Edom, they take the ark, and for some reason unknown to us, but they're doing everything right because God blesses them. So when we go back, all the way back to Exodus, and Moses is standing there and he puts 6 tribes on this mountain, 6 tribes on this mountain, and he says, if you do this, God's going to bless you, but if you do this, God's going to curse you. And he announces these blessings and curses. And now we see in this that God has chosen to bless his family because they are doing something right. We're never allowed to know, but we know in contrast that if Uzzah was just acting in any way that he saw fit to handle the ark of God, this family was doing it the opposite way. They were following some direction. Maybe they knew the law. Maybe God was speaking directly to them. Maybe it is that God doesn't want to strike everybody's dead that's near the ark. He really wants to take care of those folks that are near the ark. So this is just places that we can dig and dig and dig and go to, which teaches us that we should consult God before we approach God, and that there is a way in which we can approach God that truly does bless us and our entire family, or those that we love, or those that are with us on whatever journey or in this responsibility. It matters to Him. One reason why it matters, other than His holiness, is because there's something about that that says to us, we need to approach God to know God. So when we look later on in 2 Chronicles, after the nations divided, there's a few places there, especially with the King Asa, where God says, if you seek me, I will be found by you. Meaning that when you seek for me, everything that I am that you need to know, you will know. And so Asa does that. Worship breaks out across the country. Tithes and offerings go through the roof. Everything's right because everyone, including the king, their entire focus now is not on warring with others. It's on seeking God. Then it makes all the difference in the world. Until, we'll see this later in 2 Chronicles, Asa lost sight of that. And it caused great trouble for him. So this is not just a one-off proposition by God. This is something that we see all the way through with God. Right up until Jesus, when we have to seek Jesus. We come to Jesus. He calls and we come. And then He offers everything to us when we surrender to Him. Okay, so in 1 Chronicles chapter 14, we've already gone over this. This actually corresponds to 2 Samuel chapter 5. So now we ask, why are these, so much of what we find in 1 Chronicles is out of order. Chronological order, I should say. So the purpose of these annals or these chronicles is not to present a historical order of things. It's to present a theological presentation. Okay? So in between David, this whole thing with David being angry and Uzzah dying and the ark being kind of put on the side rail for 3 months, in between this, we're given a story that happened before of how God blessed David. Okay? So the writer of Chronicles is wanting us to see two things here. That things can go wrong, but let me remind you just how good God is. And so we are reminded in chapter 14 of the many times that David went out and defeated the Philistines. Okay? And God did it. Okay? It wasn't David that did it. We're reminded in this chapter that God does it. And so as soon as God is back on the scene with the ark, we are reminded about just how wonderful and merciful and mighty He is for His people. Then we get over, I don't want to plow that ground again, but we get over to chapter 15 and we continue with the ark story. So chapter 14 is just kind of set in there as a reminder of what God's been doing while He's been stuck, while they've had Him over at Abinadab's house. The ark was there, but God was busy. And we're reminded again of just how involved He's been in David's life. Okay, then chapter 15. The title above the chapter for my Bible says the ark comes to Jerusalem. And this whole chapter is about 3 months later, David figures out, I'm going to do this the way God has instructed us to do it. So David built houses for himself in the city of David, and he prepared a place for the ark of God and pitched a tent for it. Then David said, no one but the Levites may carry the ark of God, because the Lord has chosen them to carry the ark of the Lord and to minister before him forever. Where did he get that from? He got it.
Lord.
He must have asked.
Yeah, he got it right out of the law, didn't he? So he went to Abijah, which was Eli's sole surviving grandson,